The bedroom door wasn't properly shut, and when Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard pushed it open, his entire world collapsed in a single, suffocating moment. Sarah, his wife of 12 years, wasn't alone. She was tangled up with Marcus, her personal trainer, right there on their marriage bed. The same bed where they used to pray together every morning, the same bed where he'd knelt countless times asking God to bless their union. Marcus scrambled desperately to pull his clothes back on, but Sarah just slowly turned her head, her eyes meeting her husband's with a blank, chilling emptiness that cut deeper than any scream ever could. The air was thick with betrayal, heavy with the scent of expensive cologne that wasn't his, and Elias felt something inside him die right there on the spot. "Get out," he managed, his voice a low, broken whisper that barely sounded human. Marcus didn't need telling twice. He grabbed his gym bag and bolted down the hallway like his life depended on it, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the wreckage of a pastor's perfect world. But let me take you back to where this nightmare really began, because every story of destruction starts long before the final blow lands. It was a Wednesday night in Lagos, and the air was humid and restless. Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard stood behind the massive pulpit at Grace Dominion Ministries, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system as nearly 4,000 worshippers hung on his every word. The man was a legend in Nigerian Christian circles, the kind of pastor whose sermons went viral on YouTube within hours, whose prophetic declarations made headlines, and whose Wednesday night service, affectionately called midweek muster, had become the most anticipated midweek gathering in the entire city. Elias was in his element. His navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, his voice was strong and commanding, and his message about spiritual warfare had the congregation shouting "Amen" and "Preach, Pastor" every few seconds. This was supposed to be a 3-hour marathon service, the kind that left people spiritually recharged and physically exhausted, but tonight something felt wrong. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his temple, spreading across his skull like wildfire. Elias paused mid-sentence, pressing his fingers against his forehead. He'd had headaches before, occupational hazard of a man who spent 16 hours a day serving the Lord, but this one was different. This one felt like a warning. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice suddenly strained, "I need to cut our service short tonight. The Lord is leading me to rest." The congregation murmured in surprise. Reverend Vanguard never cut services short. Never, but they nodded respectfully, understanding that even mighty men of God needed to listen to their bodies sometimes. By 8:45 p.m., Elias was driving his black Mercedes through the imposing gates of their mansion in Lekki Phase 1. The house was a testament to God's blessings, a sprawling modern masterpiece with marble floors, towering ceilings, and enough rooms to house a small village. But tonight, as the gates clanged shut behind him, the mansion didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt cold, empty, almost hostile. He expected to find Sarah in the living room, maybe curled up with her Bible or on the phone organizing one of her charity events. Sarah was known throughout the church as the perfect pastor's wife, elegant, gracious, always smiling, always supportive. She led the women's ministry, organized outreach programs, and never missed a service. People called them couple goals, the power due of Nigerian Christianity. But as Elias stepped into the marble foyer, he heard something unexpected. Soft, rhythmic music drifting down from upstairs. And then he saw them, a pair of unfamiliar gym shoes sitting right next to Sarah's designer heels by the staircase. His heart stuttered. Those weren't his shoes. Elias moved slowly up the stairs, each step feeling like he was walking toward the edge of a cliff. His pastoral composure, the unshakable confidence that made him a rock for thousands, began crumbling with every footfall. The music grew louder. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the crack he could see movement. He pushed the door open, and that's when his world shattered. Hey my people, before we continue, if you're feeling this story, do me a favor and smash that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Lagos, Abuja, London, Houston, wherever you are, I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join this storytelling family, because we're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to Elias, because what happened in that bedroom was about to turn his entire life upside down. Marcus was gone, but Sarah remained, standing there in nothing but a loose silk robe, her expression utterly unbothered. She tightened the belt slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world to explain why she just destroyed their marriage. Sarah, Elias' voice cracked, his face collapsing into something unrecognizable, pain, shock, disbelief all twisted together. What did you do? She didn't flinch, she didn't cry, she didn't even look away. Don't give me that look, Elias, she said coldly. Don't act like I'm the only one who broke the rules. Broke them, his voice exploded, bouncing off the walls. You ruined our marriage, you had him in our bed, Sarah, while I was out there preaching the gospel. Sarah stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something low and dangerous, something that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Yes, while you were preaching, while you were praying, while you were saving strangers and fighting demons, I was dying right here, Elias, trapped in this silent, beautiful prison. Her hands flew up in pure frustration. This is on you, you caused this. He stumbled backward like she'd physically struck him. My fault. Every single day, she hissed. If you weren't on your knees praying, you were at the church. If you weren't at the church, you were writing another sermon. And when we were finally in bed together, what was your line? Her voice turned mocking. I'm wiped out, Sarah, I'm tired, honey. The Lord's work is heavy. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of rage. You cared more about that pulpit than you cared about me. You chose your followers over your wife. You gave them all your energy, your passion, everything you had, and you left me with the leftovers of a burnt-out man. She glanced toward the empty doorway where Marcus had fled. I was desperate, Elias, desperate for someone to touch me, desperate for attention, desperate for someone to look at me like I mattered more than your next big crusade. Marcus saw me. He gave me what you deliberately let starve. Elias Vanguard, the mighty man of God, finally collapsed. He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He just sank heavily onto the edge of the bed, the now tainted bed, and stared at the wreckage of his life. His church was thriving, his status was untouchable. His sermons were changing lives across the nation. But the one thing he should have protected, the one altar he should have tended daily, he had completely abandoned. And now, sitting in the suffocating silence of that bedroom, a terrifying question crept into his mind. Could a man who saved thousands of souls, but lost his own wife, ever truly call himself a man of God? The answer would come soon enough, and it would cost him everything. Elias didn't sleep that night. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, Sarah and Marcus, tangled together, destroying everything he'd built. He sat in his study until dawn, staring at the wall covered with framed photos of him and Sarah at conferences, crusades, and charity events. In every single picture, they were smiling, holding hands, looking like the perfect couple that everyone believed they were. It was all a lie. By 6:00 a.m., his phone was already buzzing with messages from church leaders, ministry partners, and staff members asking if he was okay. Word had spread that he'd cut the service short, and in the world of mega ministry, even the smallest deviation from routine sparked concern. But Elias couldn't bring himself to respond. What was he supposed to say? That his wife had been sleeping with her trainer, that his perfect marriage was a carefully constructed illusion. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah appeared in the doorway, fully dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, her hair pulled back elegantly. She looked ready for a business meeting, not like a woman who'd just blown up her marriage hours ago. We need to talk, she said simply, her voice devoid of emotion. Elias looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. Talk, what's left to talk about, Sarah? She walked into the study and closed the door behind her, leaning against it with her arms crossed. About what happens next, about how we handle this. Handle this, Elias stood up, his voice rising. You cheated on me, you destroyed our vows, there's nothing to handle except the truth. Keep your voice down, Sarah said sharply, glancing toward the window. The staff will be here soon, and the last thing we need is for this to become gossip. Elias stared at her in disbelief. You're worried about gossip, Sarah, you committed adultery, in our home, in our bed. And you committed emotional abandonment for 12 years. She shot back, her calm facade finally cracking. You think cheating is the only way to destroy a marriage. You killed us slowly, Elias. Every missed anniversary, every cancelled date, every night you chose your office over our bedroom, that was your betrayal. Mine just happened to be more visible. The words hit him like physical blows, and for a moment, Elias couldn't breathe. Part of him wanted to scream that she was wrong, that his ministry was God's work, that saving souls was more important than date nights. But another part of him, a quieter, more honest part, whispered that maybe she had a point. So what do you want? He asked finally, his voice hollow. A divorce. Sarah's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time since he'd caught her, Something like uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "But I know what we need. We need to keep this quiet. Your reputation, our ministry, everything we've built, it all depends on us handling this carefully." Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. "You want me to pretend, to keep preaching like nothing happened?" "I want you to be smart," Sarah said firmly. "If this gets out, you're finished. Grace Dominion Ministries will collapse. All those people who depend on you, all those programs we fund, all those lives we're changing gone, because of one scandal." "One scandal," Elias' voice was dangerously quiet. "You make it sound like you spilled coffee on the carpet." "I'm being practical," Sarah insisted. "We can figure out our marriage later, but right now we need to protect what we've built. We can go to counseling, we can work through this privately, but publicly we stay united. We stay strong." Elias turned away from her, his mind spinning. Everything she was saying made logical sense. A scandal like this would destroy not just him, but thousands of people who depended on the church. But could he really stand behind that pulpit every week, preaching about holiness and faithfulness while living a lie? "I need time," he said quietly. "I need to think." Sarah nodded, her expression softening just slightly. "Take the time you need. But Elias, don't do anything rash, don't tell anyone. Not your assistant pastor, not your prayer partners, no one. Promise me." He didn't answer, and after a long moment, Sarah left the study, closing the door softly behind her. Fam, if you're hooked on this story, do me a solid right now. Drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and comment below telling me what you think Sarah should do next. Should Elias forgive her? Should he expose the truth? Let me know your thoughts, because this story is about to get even more intense. Now let's get back to Elias, because his nightmare was only just beginning. By Thursday afternoon, Elias still hadn't left the house. He'd cancelled all his appointments, ignored every phone call, and sent a brief text to his assistant pastor saying he was dealing with a personal emergency. But he couldn't hide forever, and he knew it. At 3:00 p.m. there was a knock on his study door. It wasn't Sarah this time. It was Grace, their 19-year-old daughter, home from university in Abuja for the weekend. "Dad," her voice was tentative, worried. "Can I come in?" Elias quickly wiped his face and straightened his posture. "Yes, sweetheart, come in." Grace entered, her expression filled with concern. She was the spitting image of her mother, elegant, poised, beautiful, but she had her father's gentle spirit and genuine compassion. She sat down across from him, studying his face carefully. "Dad, what's going on? Mom said you weren't feeling well, but you look broken." Elias tried to smile, but it came out twisted and painful. "I'm fine, Grace, just tired." "Don't lie to me," she said softly. "I'm not a child anymore. I can see when something's wrong, and I can feel the tension in this house. What happened between you and Mom?" Elias felt his throat tighten. Grace was his pride and joy, the one pure, beautiful thing in his life that he knew he'd done right. How could he tell her that her mother had betrayed their family? How could he shatter her image of their perfect Christian home? "Your mother and I are going through a difficult time," he said carefully. "But we're going to work through it." Grace leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "Dad, please, talk to me. You always tell people in the church to be honest, to bring their struggles into the light. But you're sitting here in the dark, carrying something heavy all by yourself." Her words pierced through his defenses, and before he could stop himself, the truth came tumbling out. "Your mother has been unfaithful," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I caught her with someone in our home." Grace's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. "What? No, that's impossible. Mom would never." "I saw them, Grace," Elias said, tears streaming down his face now. "With my own eyes, and she doesn't even seem sorry. She blames me. She says I neglected her, that I chose the church over her, and maybe she's right." Grace sat frozen, her world clearly spinning. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at her father with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Then slowly her expression hardened into something Elias had never seen before, cold, calculated anger. "Where is she?" Grace asked quietly. "Grace, don't." "Where is she, Dad?" Before Elias could answer, they heard the front door open. Sarah's voice echoed through the foyer, cheerful and light, talking on the phone about some upcoming church event. Grace stood up, her jaw clenched, and walked toward the door. "Grace, wait," Elias called after her, but she was already gone. He heard voices in the hallway, Grace's sharp and accusing, Sarah's defensive and rising. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. "If you think I'm going to let you destroy this family, Mother, you're wrong. I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll stand up in church on Sunday and expose you myself." Sarah's response was low and venomous, too quiet for Elias to hear clearly, but whatever she said made Grace gasp audibly. Elias rushed out of his study just in time to see Grace stumbling backward, her hand pressed against her mouth, her face drained of all colour. "What did you say to her?" Elias demanded, moving toward his daughter. Sarah stood there, arms crossed, her expression icy and unmoved. "I told her the truth, the whole truth, about why I did what I did, and about the secrets you've been keeping too, Elias." Elias felt the floor drop out from under him. "What are you talking about?" Grace turned to look at her father, and the betrayal in her eyes was worse than anything he'd felt the night before. "Is it true, Dad? Is it true what Mom just told me about the money?" And just like that, Elias realized that Sarah's betrayal wasn't the only secret threatening to destroy everything he'd built. What secret was Sarah talking about? And could Elias' crumbling empire survive 2 scandals instead of 1? The truth would come out soon, and it would set the whole city on fire. Grace's question hung in the air like a loaded gun, and Elias felt his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He looked at his daughter's face, so young, so hurt, so confused, and then at Sarah, who stood there with a cruel, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Grace, let me explain," Elias started, reaching toward his daughter, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "Is it true?" Grace repeated, her voice trembling. "Did you steal money from the church?" "I didn't steal anything," Elias said quickly, his voice rising in desperation. "That's not what happened at all. Your mother is twisting the truth to make herself look better." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Twisting the truth? Elias, you've been diverting church funds into private accounts for 3 years. 3 years. Don't you dare stand there and act like you're some innocent victim." Grace looked between her parents, tears streaming down her face. "Someone tell me what's going on, right now." Elias ran his hands over his face, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to come out. This wasn't supposed to come out at all. He moved to the living room and sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly feeling 100 years old. "Sit down, Grace," he said quietly. "Both of you, I'll explain everything." Sarah remained standing, but Grace slowly lowered herself onto the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Elias took a deep breath and began. 4 years ago, the church was growing faster than we could manage. Money was pouring in from tithes, offerings, donations from wealthy members, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The board wanted to build a bigger auditorium, expand our media ministry, open branches in other cities. Everyone had ideas about what to do with God's blessings. He paused, remembering those heady days when success felt unstoppable. But I started noticing things. Some of the board members were living lifestyles that didn't match their salaries. Designer clothes, expensive cars, luxury vacations. When I started asking questions, I discovered that several of them had been skimming money from construction projects, inflating invoices and pocketing the difference. Grace's eyes widened. They were stealing from the church. "Yes," Elias said, "but they were powerful men with connections to politicians and business people who supported our ministry. If I exposed them publicly, it would have created a massive scandal. The church would have been torn apart, our reputation would have been destroyed, everything we'd built would have collapsed." Sarah crossed her arms. "So instead of doing the right thing, you did something worse." Elias' jaw tightened. "I did what I thought was necessary. I quietly removed those men from the board, one by one, finding diplomatic ways to ease them out. But I knew they'd taken millions, and I knew that money would never be recovered, so I made a decision." "What decision?" Grace whispered. "I created private accounts," Elias admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "Separate from the church's main accounts. I started diverting a percentage of the incoming donations, 10%, into these accounts. I told myself it was insurance, a safety net in case those corrupt board members tried to retaliate or in case the church faced a financial crisis. I convinced myself I was protecting the ministry." The room fell silent. Grace stared at her father like she was seeing him for the first time. 10% of millions of naira, Sarah said coldly. "Do you know how much money that is, Grace? Your father has been sitting on a fortune while telling the congregation to give sacrificially, to trust God with their finances, to sow seeds of faith." "I never touched that money for personal gain," Elias shot back. "Not once. It's all still there, sitting in those accounts, waiting for..." "Waiting for what?" Sarah interrupted. Waiting for you to get caught, waiting for the perfect moment to play hero and discover the funds, or waiting for the day you'd need to disappear because your lies finally caught up with you. Elias stood up abruptly. That's not fair, Sarah. You know why I did it. You were there when those men were threatening us, when they said they'd destroy the church if I exposed them. You agreed that we needed to be strategic. I agreed to let them go quietly, Sarah said sharply. I never agreed to you becoming exactly what they were, a thief hiding behind a pastor's collar. Grace suddenly stood up, her face flushed with anger and betrayal. Both of you need to stop, just stop. She looked at her mother. You cheated on Dad and destroyed our family. Then she turned to her father. And you've been lying to thousands of people who trust you, who give their hard-earned money because they believe in you. She grabbed her bag from the hallway table. I can't be here right now. I can't look at either of you. Grace, please, Elias called after her, but she was already heading toward the door. Don't follow me, Grace said without turning around. I need to think. I need to figure out if anything about this family was ever real. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the massive, empty house. Hey, my people, before we go any further, I need you to hit that like button if this story has you on the edge of your seat. Comment below and tell me, should Elias come clean publicly, or should he keep the secret buried? And don't forget to subscribe because the next episode is going to shake everything up even more. Now let's get back to the story, because things are about to get dangerous. That evening, Elias sat alone in his study, staring at his laptop screen. He'd pulled up the banking information for the 3 private accounts he'd created years ago. Sarah was right about one thing: the total amount was staggering. Over 80 million naira, just sitting there untouched, slowly accumulating interest. He told himself 1,000 times that he'd done the right thing, that he was protecting the church. But looking at those numbers now, all he felt was sick. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel, his assistant pastor and closest confidant. Pastor, we need to talk urgently. Can I come by the house tonight? Elias hesitated, then typed back, Not tonight, Daniel, I'm dealing with family matters. The reply came almost instantly. It can't wait, it's about Trevor. Elias' blood went cold. Trevor was one of the corrupt board members he'd quietly removed 3 years ago. Trevor had disappeared from Lagos shortly after, supposedly moving to Abuja to start a business. They hadn't spoken since. What about Trevor? Elias typed quickly. He's back in Lagos, and he's been asking questions about church finances. Says he has information that could destroy you. I think he knows about the accounts. Elias felt the walls closing in. He looked up to find Sarah standing in the doorway of his study, her expression unreadable. Who's Trevor? She asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew. One of the board members I removed, Elias said slowly. The most dangerous one. Sarah walked into the room and sat down across from him. For the first time since he'd caught her with Marcus, she looked genuinely worried. How much does he know? I don't know, Elias admitted. But if he's been digging, if he's found evidence of those accounts, Sarah, he could go public. He could report me to the authorities. Everything would come out, the corruption, the cover-up, all of it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she leaned forward. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned earlier. Elias' stomach dropped. What? Marcus, she said carefully, he's not just a personal trainer. What are you talking about? Sarah took a deep breath. His real name is Marcus Trevor. He's Trevor's nephew, and I don't think our affair was an accident. The room started spinning. Elias gripped the edge of his desk, trying to process what she was saying. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the man you've been sleeping with is related to Trevor, the man who wants to destroy me. Sarah nodded, her face pale. I didn't know at first, I swear I didn't. He told me his last name was Johnson, but yesterday after you caught us, he sent me a message. He said his uncle wanted to thank me for making his job easier. Elias felt rage and fear colliding in his chest. This was a setup. The whole thing was a setup to get information, to get close to us too. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. Pastor, Trevor's holding a press conference tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the Civic Center. He says he's exposing corruption in Lagos churches. Your name is on the invitation list. Elias and Sarah stared at each other in horror. Was Trevor about to destroy everything they'd built? And could they stop him before the whole truth came crashing down? Tomorrow morning would bring answers, and possibly the end of Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard's empire. Elias didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in his study, watching the clock tick toward morning, knowing that in just a few hours his entire world might come crashing down in front of cameras, journalists, and the entire city of Lagos. Sarah had retreated to one of the guest rooms, and Grace still wasn't answering her phone. He'd never felt more alone in his life. At 5:30 a.m. his phone rang. It was Daniel. "Pastor, I'm outside your gate," his assistant pastor said urgently. "We need to strategize before this press conference. Let me in." Elias buzzed him through, and minutes later, Daniel was sitting across from him in the study, his face grave and deeply concerned. Daniel was 42, a loyal friend who'd served alongside Elias for nearly 8 years. He was sharp, street-smart, and fiercely protective of the ministry. "Tell me everything," Daniel said. "What does Trevor have on you?" Elias hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding anymore. He told Daniel about the corrupt board members, the private accounts, the diverted funds, everything. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every revelation. When Elias finished, Daniel leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Pastor, I'm going to be straight with you. If Trevor has proof of those accounts, you're finished. Not just your reputation, you could face criminal charges. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They'll tear you apart." "I know," Elias said quietly. But Daniel continued, "If we get ahead of this, if we control the narrative, we might be able to minimize the damage." Elias looked up. "What are you suggesting?" "We go to the press conference," Daniel said. "We don't hide. We show up, and when Trevor makes his accusations, you admit to everything. Not with excuses, with honesty. You tell them exactly what you told me. You explain why you did it, how you were trying to protect the church from corrupt men, and you announce that you're returning every single naira to the church treasury. You step down from leadership temporarily and submit yourself to an independent audit." "Step down," Elias felt his chest tighten. "Daniel, Grace Dominion is my life's work." "And if you don't step down voluntarily, they'll force you out anyway," Daniel said firmly. "At least this way you maintain some dignity, you show humility, you show that you're willing to be accountable. It's the only way you might survive this." Elias stared at his friend, knowing he was right but hatting every word. "What about Sarah?" he asked. "Trevor's nephew Marcus, he was using her to get information to destabilize our family. Should I mention that?" Daniel shook his head. "Absolutely not. If you bring up Sarah's affair publicly, you'll look petty and vindictive. People will say you're trying to deflect from your own sins by exposing hers. Keep the focus on your actions, your repentance, your path forward." Elias nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it." "We leave in 2 hours," Daniel said, standing up. "Get dressed, pray, and prepare yourself, Pastor. This is going to be the hardest day of your life." By 9:30 a.m., Elias and Daniel were sitting in Daniel's car outside the Lagos Civic Center. The building was already surrounded by news vans, cameras, and journalists eager for a scandal. Elias could see Trevor's smug face on a banner hanging near the entrance. EXPOSING corruption in the house of God. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked. Elias took a deep breath. "No, but let's go anyway." They stepped out of the car, and immediately cameras swung in their direction. Journalists shouted questions, microphones were thrust toward his face, but Daniel cleared a path, and they made their way inside. The conference hall was packed. Elias recognized faces from other churches, religious leaders, politicians, and even some members of his own congregation. They all turned to stare as he entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. And there, at the front of the room on a raised platform, stood Trevor. He was older now, grayer, but his eyes still held that same calculating coldness that Elias remembered. Trevor smiled when he saw Elias, a predator's smile, and gestured toward an empty seat near the front. "Reverend Vanguard," Trevor called out, his voice booming through the microphone. "How good of you to join us. Please sit down, this concerns you directly." Elias sat, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. Sarah had wanted to come, but he told her to stay home. This was his mess to clean up. Trevor began his presentation with slides, documents, and bank statements projected onto a massive screen behind him. He walked the audience through the history of Grace Dominion Ministries' finances, pointing out discrepancies, missing funds, and suspicious transfers. Then he dropped the bomb. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trevor said dramatically, "Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard has been diverting church funds into private accounts for over 3 years. Not thousands of naira, not hundreds of thousands, millions, 83 million naira to be exact. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked furiously. Elias felt the weight of 1,000 judgmental stares. He claims to be a man of God, Trevor continued, but he's nothing more than a common thief, hiding behind a pulpit and a Bible. He removed honest board members who questioned his authority, and he's been enriching himself while telling his congregation to give sacrificially. Trevor turned to face Elias directly. Do you deny these accusations, Reverend? The room fell silent. Every eye was on Elias. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life. Elias stood slowly and walked toward the podium. Trevor stepped aside with a mocking bow, offering him the microphone. I don't deny it, Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart. Trevor is right. I created private accounts, I diverted church funds, and I did it in secret without the knowledge or approval of the congregation. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions, people gasped, and cameras flashed like lightning. Elias raised his hand, asking for silence. But let me tell you the full story, he continued. 3 years ago, I discovered that several board members, including Trevor himself, were embezzling money from construction projects and ministry programs. They were stealing from the church, lining their own pockets while pretending to serve God. Trevor's face darkened. That's a lie. Is it? Elias pulled out his phone and held it up. I have emails, text messages, and recorded conversations proving your corruption, Trevor. I removed you and the others quietly because I didn't want to destroy the church with a public scandal. But in doing so, I made a terrible mistake. Fam, if you're still with me, smash that like button right now. This story is getting intense, and I need to know you're feeling it. Drop a comment telling me, is Elias doing the right thing by confessing, or is he making things worse? Subscribe if you haven't already, because the final episode is going to blow your mind. Now let's get back to this showdown, because it's about to get even crazier. I created those accounts as insurance, Elias continued, his voice growing stronger. I thought I was protecting the church. I thought I was being wise, but I was wrong. I became what I hated. I let fear and pride turn me into a liar, and for that I am deeply, truly sorry. He turned to face the audience, tears streaming down his face now. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am announcing today that every single naira in those accounts, all 83 million, will be returned to Grace Dominion Ministries immediately. I'm stepping down from my position as senior pastor, effective today, and I'm submitting myself to an independent audit and whatever legal consequences may come. The room was stunned into silence. Trevor recovered quickly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. How noble, how convenient. You return the money only when you're caught, and you expect us to believe you're repentant. I don't expect anything, Elias said quietly. I'm simply telling the truth, something you've never done, Trevor. You sanctimonious. Before Trevor could finish, the conference hall doors burst open. Grace rushed in, her face flushed and urgent, followed closely by 2 police officers in uniform. Stop, Grace shouted, holding up her phone. Everyone needs to hear this. Elias' heart jumped. Grace, what are you? Dad, I did some digging last night, Grace said, her voice shaking but determined. I found Marcus, Trevor's nephew, and I recorded our conversation. She connected her phone to the hall's sound system, and suddenly Marcus's voice filled the room. Yeah, my uncle paid me $50,000 to get close to the Vanguard family. He told me to seduce Sarah, get information about the church finances, whatever it took to destroy the pastor. It was all a setup from the beginning. Sarah never stood a chance. I played her like a violin. The recording continued with Marcus laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate Sarah, how Trevor had orchestrated everything as revenge for being removed from the board. The room exploded into chaos. Trevor's face went white as the police officers moved toward him. Journalists surrounded him, shouting questions, while others rushed to Elias, asking for his reaction. But Elias wasn't looking at Trevor. He was looking at Sarah, who had just entered the hall, her face pale and stricken as she heard the truth about Marcus's betrayal. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and in that moment, something shifted. The anger, the hurt, the accusations, all of it suddenly seemed less important than the fact that they'd both been victims of Trevor's twisted revenge scheme. But could they survive this scandal together, or had too much damage already been done? And more importantly, What would the church, the city, and the nation decide about Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard's fate? The final chapter was about to unfold, and nothing would ever be the same. The police officers escorted Trevor out of the civic centre in handcuffs, while journalists swarmed around him like vultures, their cameras flashing, their voices shouting accusations that just hours ago had been directed at Elias. Trevor's face was twisted with rage and humiliation, and as he passed Elias, he spat out words laced with venom. "This isn't over, Vanguard. You think you've won. You're still a fraud. You still stole from your own people." Elias said nothing, because Trevor was right about one thing: confession didn't erase the crime. Returning the money didn't undo 3 years of deception. And stepping down from the pulpit didn't magically restore the trust he'd shattered. As the crowd began to disperse, Elias felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah standing behind him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For the first time since he'd caught her with Marcus, she looked genuinely broken. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise around them. "I had no idea Marcus was using me. I thought he actually cared." Elias looked at his wife, the woman he'd promised to love and cherish for better or worse, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than the rage he'd been carrying. "We were both used," he said quietly. "Trevor wanted to destroy us and he almost succeeded." "Almost?" Sarah's voice broke. "Elias, look around. He did succeed. Your reputation is destroyed, our marriage is in ruins, and Grace can barely look at either of us. We've lost everything." "No," Elias said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "We've lost what we built on lies, but we still have a chance to rebuild on truth." Sarah stared at him, hope and skepticism battling in her expression. "Do we, after everything, after what I did, after what you did?" Before Elias could answer, Grace appeared beside them, her face exhausted but resolute. She looked at both her parents with an expression that was equal parts love and disappointment. "We need to go home," Grace said. "All 3 of us together, because this mess isn't getting solved in front of cameras." The drive back to the Lekki mansion was silent and suffocating. Daniel had offered to come with them, but Elias had declined. This was family business now, and they needed to face it alone. When they finally walked through the front door, the house that had once symbolized blessing and success now felt like a museum of broken dreams. They gathered in the living room, the same room where they'd hosted prayer meetings, celebrated ministry milestones, and entertained important guests. Now it felt like a courtroom. Grace sat down first, folding her hands in her lap with the kind of composure that reminded Elias painfully of himself. "We need to talk about what happens next. All of us. No more secrets, no more lies, no more avoiding the truth." Elias and Sarah sat across from their daughter, and for a moment, Elias saw them through Grace's eyes. 2 broken, flawed people who'd let ambition, neglect, and pride destroy what should have been sacred. "I'm leaving Grace Dominion Ministries permanently," Elias said, breaking the silence. "Not just stepping down temporarily. I'm done. I can't lead people spiritually when I've compromised everything I preached about." Sarah looked shocked. "Elias, that church is your life." "No," he said firmly. "It became my life, it became my idol. And in worshipping it, I sacrificed you. I sacrificed our marriage. I sacrificed the calling God actually gave me to be a faithful husband and father first and a pastor second." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, what will you do?" "I don't know yet," Elias admitted. "Maybe I'll serve in a smaller church somewhere, doing ministry without the spotlight. Maybe I'll take time to heal and restore what I broke. But I know one thing, I can't keep pretending to have all the answers when I couldn't even protect my own family." He turned to Sarah. "As for us, I don't know if we can fix this marriage. I don't know if you even want to try. But I'm willing to go to counseling, to do the hard work, to actually fight for you instead of just expecting you to endure my absence." Sarah's face crumpled, and she covered it with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. When she finally looked up, her voice was raw with emotion. "I want to try," she said. "God help me, after everything, I still want to try. Because the truth is, Elias, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing you loved me back. And when Marcus showed me attention, when he made me feel seen and wanted, I convinced myself that what we had was already dead. But it wasn't dead, it was just dying, and I was too cowardly to fight for it." Grace stood up abruptly, wiping her tears. "Stop, both of you, just stop." They looked at her, startled. I love you both, Grace said, her voice shaking with emotion. But I'm not going to sit here and watch you make promises you might not keep. Words are easy. Dad, you promised to cherish Mom, and you abandoned her emotionally for 12 years. Mom, you promised to be faithful, and you brought another man into this house. So forgive me if I don't trust either of your declarations right now. She grabbed her bag. I'm going back to Abuja. I need space from this. But here's what I need from both of you if you actually want me to believe you can change actions. Not words, not tears. Actions. Go to counseling. Rebuild trust slowly. And prove to me and to each other and to God that you actually mean what you say. Hey my people, we're in the final moments of this story, and I need you to do something for me. If this episode has touched your heart, if you felt every emotion with this family, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you learned from Elias and Sarah's story. And please, subscribe to this channel because we have so many more powerful stories coming your way. You don't want to miss a single one. Now let's finish this journey together. 3 months later, things looked very different. Elias and Sarah were sitting in a small, modest counselling office in a quiet part of Lagos, meeting with a Christian therapist named Dr. Helen, a wise, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who specialised in restoring broken marriages. They'd been coming twice a week, every week, working through years of pain, resentment, and unmet expectations. It was hard. Some sessions ended with both of them in tears. Other sessions ended in angry silence, but they kept showing up, and slowly, painfully, something began to shift. Elias had taken a part-time job teaching at a small Bible college, earning a fraction of what he used to make, but finding strange peace in the simplicity. He'd returned all 83 million naira to Grace Dominion Ministries, and the church board, now led by Daniel, had used the money to start a transparency initiative and a fund for struggling families in the congregation. The media storm had eventually died down. Some people still called Elias a fraud and a hypocrite. Others saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power in ministry. But a small group of people, mostly those who'd known him longest, reached out with messages of grace and support, reminding him that redemption was always possible. Sarah had left her role as First Lady of Grace Dominion and started volunteering at a women's shelter, working with survivors of abuse and betrayal. She'd cut all ties with Marcus, who'd been arrested along with Trevor for conspiracy and fraud, and she'd started the painful work of understanding why she'd been vulnerable to manipulation in the first place. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their now much quieter home, Sarah reached over and took Elias' hand. "Do you think Grace will ever fully trust us again?" she asked softly. Elias squeezed her hand. "I think she will, but we have to earn it, day by day, choice by choice." "I miss her," Sarah whispered. "So do I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the Lagos sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. It wasn't the life they'd imagined. It wasn't the powerful, influential celebrity lifestyle they'd once had, but it was real. It was honest. And for the first time in years, it felt like theirs. Elias' phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace. "Coming home this weekend, we should talk, all of us." Sarah saw it too and smiled through her tears. "She's giving us another chance." "Then we'd better not waste it," Elias said. He thought about everything he'd lost, his position, his reputation, his empire. But he also thought about what he was gaining, his wife, his daughter, his integrity. And he realized something profound. He'd spent years building a kingdom for God while neglecting the kingdom God had actually entrusted to him, his family. Maybe that was the real message all along. 6 months after the press conference, Reverend Dr. Elias Vanguard stood in front of a small congregation of about 50 people in a humble church in a working-class neighborhood of Lagos. He wasn't the senior pastor, just a volunteer teacher helping with Bible study on Wednesday nights. No cameras, no live stream, no thousands of followers. Just people, real, hurting, hopeful people, who needed to hear that even broken vessels could still carry living water. "My name is Elias," he began, his voice steady and humble, "and I'm a recovering, prideful man. I've made terrible mistakes. I've hurt people I love. I've compromised my calling. But I'm here today to tell you that God's grace is bigger than our failures, and redemption is always possible for those willing to walk the hard road of repentance." In the back row, Sarah sat next to Grace, both of them listening. Grace reached over and squeezed her mother's hand, and Sarah squeezed back. They were far from healed. The scars were still fresh, the trust still fragile, the future still uncertain. But they were together, they were honest, and they were trying. And sometimes that's all redemption requires. The courage to try again, even after everything falls apart. Because the most powerful testimony isn't a perfect life. It's a broken life made whole by grace, one painful, honest step at a time. Thank you, fam, for taking this journey with us. If this story moved you, blessed you, or taught you something about forgiveness, grace, and the cost of redemption, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment about what spoke to you most. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll be back soon with another powerful story that'll grip your heart and challenge your soul. Until next time, remember, no matter how far you've fallen, grace can always reach you. And no matter how broken your story, God specializes in beautiful endings born from painful beginnings. Stay blessed, stay real, and keep believing in second chances.